Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. I'm your host, derbyologist, and joining me again, our handicapper, Candice Care, capping with Candice. And Candice, this week we have a kind of a variety of stakes races, but first off, we'll start off at the Spa. And the Forego is kind of the East Coast counterpart to the Pat O'Brien. It's pretty much the top sprinters on the East Coast going 7 furlongs.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting race. I struggled with it a little bit because I really wanted to find a price in here, and I couldn't. I mean, to me, there's only about 3 or 4 horses where we could really see winning this race. You'd have to think the favorite will be Clearly Now, who, all year has been getting bet down, and then he finally got it done last time out in a very, very big way at Belmont back in July. He's a well-deserved favorite here. I mean, even in the runs where, he's finishing second or third, he always ran, a good race, and he was kind of like the trip notes horse of the year until he finally broke through last time out. So I really see it between him and between Palace, who he beat, fairly easily last time out. Palace came back after that, though, to win in the Vanderbilt, running down the front runner Happy My Way in that race. Personally, I have to side with Clearly Now just because of the distance. 7 furlongs can be a little bit quirky with these sprinters, and I think Palace is better at 6, whereas Clearly Now is better at the 7 furlong distance. So I have to go with him here. A little bit boring. I really wanted to find a price, but I just can't see past the favorite in this one.
I think it's a lot of similarities to last week's race. Golden Sense had been knocking on the door. He had 5 seconds. And then he finally busted through at 7 furlongs. Kind of in the big picture, though, like where do you think a horse like Clearly Now fits on Breeders' Cup Day? Is he a 6 furlong or does he go to the mile? Because him and Goldie are always kind of in a tough, I think for both of them it's a big decision. I mean, Goldie won the mile last year, but that's not a given.
Yeah, I mean, that's what can be tough. I do think that I would envision Clearly Now perhaps going into the mile. He just seems to be more of that 7 to 8 furlong type, but it's tough because I do definitely think him and Golden Sense as well. I mean, even though he won the mile last year, I think both of them, their strength is 7. So, yeah, it is a bit of a predicament that they get in when it comes time for the Breeders' Cup.
I ended up going with Clearly Now as well, just because he finally broke out that last race, and 7 furlongs is really the equalizer here. And I think we saw last week similarities also with Palace with the Big Mocker. Like the Big Mocker, just although he didn't really fire last week, you knew 7 furlongs wasn't going to be his game, and I'm kind of seeing the same thing with Palace. What about Capo Bastoni? He's a horse. Every time they reference Capo Bastoni, they reference his big upset at 30-1 last year, but his last 5 races, he's lost by 10 lengths every time.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think he's been disappointing ever since then. I couldn't have him here, and even with all the troubles he had last out, I mean, there's just no justifying losing by 9.5 lengths. I will say, as far as looking for a little bit of value underneath, I mean, I'm still envision that he'll be somewhat of a short price, but Falling Sky, I would expect an improved effort for him going further. He's another one who I think really relishes the 7 furlongs to a mile versus the 6 he, ran on last time out. And I thought he closed a little bit late there in the Vanderbilt. It wasn't anything, monumental by any means, but he looked pretty good there. And when we know he definitely wants further, Weaver's had a good meet here at Saratoga, and I think that Edgar Prado's been a good fit on him as well. So, maybe not perhaps a win chance, but Falling Sky I do think is interesting in this spot. I would actually love to see him run a little bit closer to the pace here. Last time out they kind of laid him off. I think maybe they were, envisioning maybe a little bit of a duel up front that didn't formulate, and he was just kind of left with a little too much to do. He's much, much better when he's on the pace or up near it. So I'd hope to see that from him here, but regardless, this distance suits him much better than last time out, so I'd expect an improved effort.
I looked long and hard at Vijack for a while, trying to make a case, and I watched his races a couple of times, and he finally got cut back the last time to the sprint, but he didn't really seem to fire, and this may have just been a case of a horse who kind of peaked last year in his 3-year-old year, kind of February, March, and really doesn't have a lot to fall back on.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, he had tons of trouble early last time out. So, to some extent, I think you could perhaps toss that race and see what he does here. Again, he's another one who I would think at the 7 furlongs would suit him a little bit better than the 6. But I can definitely see what you're saying, and being by Into Mischief, that's definitely somewhat of a win early pedigree. So perhaps he is what he is at this point.
Well, to round out my trifecta, I ended up going Clearly Now on top, Falling Sky because of the distance second, and then, Sensational Sam Slam has some races where he can kind of clunk up, and if the pace were to fall right, I could see him being kind of in the mix as they hit the turn anyways.
For me, I have same top two. I have Clearly Now over Falling Sky for pretty much the same reasons you just mentioned. For third, though, actually, I went with Big Business. This is a guy who, in lesser stakes and allowance races has been right there just about every time. He beat Capital Bastoni by 7 1/4 lengths earlier in the year, and finished second by a neck to Zevo, who we'll be talking about soon, a couple races back as well. So he's been running in good company this year, even though the stakes haven't been grade ones by any means. Jacobson's had a good meet at Saratoga, and the main thing with Big Business that's interesting to me is that he's won races from being on the lead, he's won races from rating a bit, and his last race is actually really nice. He finished second to Weekend Hideaway, who also is here, but he closed from a little bit further back on a track that really was favoring front runners. So that was a pretty nice race. Again, not really a win threat, but one to I think definitely include, for a little bit of value underneath in your plays.
Yeah, overall for me, I think it's a tough betting race. Clearly Now looks good. It's a race I got to watch him and see. I think really the key for a lot of people looking ahead is how does he fit in the big picture on Breeders' Cup Day? Does he go mile? Does he go 6 furlong sprint? And does he have another prep? I mean, you're always when you run on this weekend, you're always caught in that 60-day out thing too. And I think I already read that Big Mocker is going to try to train up to the sprint.
Yes.
And that gets tough when you start talking 60 days because at 6 furlongs, there's always plenty of speed, and you get too many fresh horses. And we saw what happened last year. Secret Circle, even with off the layoff, was able to pick up some of that cheaper speed. So should be an interesting race. Clearly Now is definitely a top horse. So, I think he would definitely be a worthy winner of the Forego. Some of these other horses, I'm not so sure. So I'm kind of hoping he just kind of does it and stays in form, and we can see what he can do. Now, the Woodward, last week we had all the top 3-year-olds from the East Coast in the Travers, and this week, really when you throw out Will Take Charge and Palace Malice, who both opted to go for the Wait Till the Jockey Club Gold Cup, now you get a 9 furlong race, and really you get all these hard-hitting 8.5, 9 furlong horses, and then the hero of the Whitney, Marino, comes back. Let's kind of first take a look at the field, and then we'll take a look at some of our thoughts.
Okay, so starting off this field, in the one spot we have Itsmyluckyday. He, of course, faced Marino last time out here at Saratoga, finishing a pretty nice second to him, considering that Marino was let go on, not a soft lead, but an uncontested lead. Prior to that, he'd won several in a row, and to be honest, he's been really a kind of a revelation coming back from injury, and it's been nice to see him running as well as he has been. In the 2 spot is Long River. This is a guy who he tends to get bet. He definitely tends to take money. He certainly took a lot of money 3 back in the Charlestown Classic, where he looked, to perhaps be in a perfect spot to get the win there, and it just didn't happen. This is a guy who, has been running in this sort of company, but just hasn't been anywhere near close recently.
Micromanage, I think the reason why he's in here, this is Repole, and it's Pletcher, and it's at the Spa, so I think they're just kind of throwing him in there. But overall, he's kind of shown he's a grade 3, grade 2 horse. I'm not sure how he fits at grade 1, even though he's coming off the big win in a small field. Marino, of course, the race favorite, 3 for 20 now, and picked up a win in the Whitney. Got a good ride that day, so we'll see if he can repeat that performance here.
Prayer for Relief. This is a Zayat horse. I mean, he's a pretty honest guy, so it'll be interesting to see how he runs here. If anything, he always runs against, top company. He's been running against these types of horses all year long. So, no surprise from a class level for him. Romansh is a really interesting horse for me in here. this is a horse who I've liked for much of the year, but he had a really just a nightmarish trip last time out uh, in the same race that we got Moreno and Itsmyluckyday and Will Take Charge from. So, it'll be interesting to see if he improves off of that effort. He's kind of one who's hit or miss. When he fires, he's definitely a win threat, but he can throw in clunkers from here and again.
Zevo is the New York bred that comes in with a 6-race win streak. It should be noted that he's won 2 of those races by a head and another one by a neck, although he did beat Moreno on the square at 1.25 miles with a good pace to run into, but he also got the rail that day. So 6-race winning streak, New York bred, but he has already beaten open company. And then Norumbega, he's a classic Tisnow out of an AP Indy horse, McGahee, and we saw last week when you get to Saratoga, there's 3 names you start looking for, and that's Mott, McGahee, and Jerkins. So I think you have to consider a horse like this, especially with that pedigree.
Last Gunfighter, only making his 4th start of the year. He's always had Castellano on board at least for this year. Switches back to Bravo, has ridden him in the past now. After winning over Valid in his 1st start of the year, he really hasn't done much since then. Kind of hard to endorse, not only based off his form, but with perhaps a probable pace scenario in here. Stefanozzi rounds out the field. Again, this is a pretty honest horse. Hasn't run at this level by any means, but just always kind of seems to be in the mix. Seemed to really enjoy stretching out to this 1.8 miles last time out, losing to Abraham. So it'll be interesting to see where he kind of fits into the mix here. Definitely an acid test for him.
Well, we're recording this on a Wednesday night. So far, the forecast looks pretty good. I think really I don't anticipate any scratches. So how did you start off by handicapping this race, and what are some of your key factors?
For me, this race really depends on the pace. I mean, on paper, there isn't much early pace in here. Easily, I could see Moreno getting away from it again, but I'm going to try to opt that won't happen. I really want to see Itsmyluckyday challenge him up front. I think Itsmyluckyday is a classier horse, and I think Itsmyluckyday really prefers this distance. And based off his form this year and from what we saw from him as a 3-year-old, I think if he's sent, to just really kind of hound Moreno, not even necessarily, take the lead, but just to be right there with him, give him some company, I think he could really just, be there with him and then just pull away coming around the far turn. I thought that he ran a good race last time out. I don't think it was as incredible as a lot of people kind of blew it up to be, but it was a nice, solid race considering how the pace formalized in that race. So I ultimately landed on Itsmyluckyday, but if he's not sent, I have a hard time then. I think then, it's going to be Moreno's for the taking.
For Moreno, I was really impressed by the ride that he got last time. It wasn't just a case of he got the lead and he sped around the track. I noticed 2 subtle moves. One of them was right after he ran a fast opening quarter. The jockey kind of took him in hand, and the second quarter was actually a little bit slower than the first. But what happened was I think people thought he was going quicker, and so he opened up just a little bit. And then also, I thought, normally a lot of times jockeys will wait coming out of the turn, and just as they went into the turn the last time, he kind of opened up by that extra length, and that's really when he put the race away. I mean, when I was watching that day, the race was over, and you just knew it. Like that extra length and a half lead, and the way he was running, you just knew it was over. So, it was a new jockey that time, and I think I think it was really 40% of the jockey and maybe 40% of the horse and maybe 20% of kind of the pace conditions. And I agree with you. I think Itsmyluckyday the last time, that was a race where what happened is everybody was watching Palace Malice.
Mm-hmm.
While everybody was watching Palace Malice, Moreno was on the front end stealing it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now you don't have a 3 to 5 shot in there. Itsmyluckyday doesn't have to worry about that. He gets blinkers. We know he's got the speed. So, yeah, he doesn't need to challenge Moreno. He just needs to keep an eye on Moreno this time. So I think that'll chase the dynamics of the race. I ended up going with Romansh. He did have a rush trip the last time. He was fanned out on both turns. Yeah, he only runs 1 of every 3 races, but he didn't run the last 2, so that means he might be ready to crank up a race this time. So, I think Romansh got caught the last time too. I think there was 3 or 4 horses all watching Palace Malice. Nobody was watching Moreno. Now Moreno's the hunted, and with a 3 for 20 lifetime record, I just don't see how you can take anything less than 5-2 on a horse like Moreno.
Yeah, and I mean it's not something we talk about often too, but I thought after his win last time out, Moreno really got hammered in the weights for this race. I think he picks up 5 pounds, and he gives away weight to everybody here as well, which doesn't do him any favors by any means. Um, like I said, I ultimately went with It's My Lucky Day. I just want to see him up there, kind of, making his presence known around Moreno, because Moreno isn't the type. Speed doesn't kill Moreno, pressure does. So if he can just make his presence known, I think that he'll be the one to kind of survive that battle, whereas Moreno might fade off late. I agree with you about Romansh that he is absolutely the trip notes horse to take out of the Whitney. I think he'll have a much improved effort here. And, he has enough tactical speed that however the pace kind of shakes out, he can, ride up closer or lay back a little bit. He's not as one-dimensional as some of the horses in here.
Prayer for relief, I wanted to talk about him. He's one of those horses that, he's not a grade 1 horse, but he does have tactical speed. I mean, if he really wanted to set the pace with J.R. Velasquez, I wouldn't be surprised if you told me that Prayer for Relief had the lead at the half-mile pole. Now, I don't think he's going to go for it, but I think he's one of those horses that has, I mean, if you really look at all 25 of his career races, there's been some races where he's been on the lead in the past. So I think a horse like that is always dangerous just because if a jockey makes a decision to kind of show some speed. And then, Zevo, I got to admit, for a New York bred, he fits in this race. That Suburban win was legit. And I think that was a good race because, Marino came out of it. He set the pace that day, and I kind of had Marino that day at 10-1 out of an outside post, and that was a good race. So to run him down, Marino was clearly second that day. I think Zevo, even though he got a rail trip, actually ran a good race.
I thought he did too. I mean, Zevo's one who I wanted to mention because does seem to be a little bit of like the wise guy horse, at least on what I'm seeing on Twitter leading up to this race. I definitely agree that he fits here. I just couldn't have him in the spot because I don't think we're going to see, any type of a super fast pace up front. And this is a guy who perhaps doesn't have as much tactical speed as some of the others. He tends to really close from the clouds, so he would really need the pace set up, and I'm not sure he's going to get that here. Distance should be fine, though. He's one over going a mile, and he's one going a mile and a quarter, so a mile and eighth should be right in his wheelhouse. If you are someone who likes him, though, two back, he did win over Big Business and Weekend Hideaway, who we'll see in the race before, so maybe keep an eye on both of them and see how they do if they frank his form any bit. But I do agree that last race of his beating Marino was quite nice. I'm just not sure the pace is going to work in his favor here.
Overall, for me, the strategy is to play Romansh, the entry, throw some backup tickets on Prayer for Relief. If the odds were right, consider a couple other horses. I think in pick 3s and pick 4s, this is the type of race you throw out a horse like Moreno. You have nothing to gain if he does win, and yet if all of a sudden he starts getting hammered and that 3 for 20 lifetime record really does speak volumes. Now, even if you throw out his first 5 races that he lost, you still get 3 for 15, which means he kind of is what he is. Every 2-3 races, he runs a big bang-up race, and maybe he's already ran that the last time. What's kind of your strategy? Are you a horizontal or vertical here, or is this not really a race for you to wager on?
No, for me, I'm definitely going to wager this. I'll definitely be playing this race in doubles and pick 3s. With the race prior to this. I completely agree. This is a race where I would just completely toss Moreno. For me, I'd use It's My Lucky Day and Romansh here. I can't really see any of the others really surprising at a big price, but I do think both of them will be square prices. And Moreno, it's really going to be a heavy favorite in my opinion. So, if you can toss him, I think if you can kind of just get anyone else, you're going to have a decent payout.
Out west, the turf meets the surf, and last week we saw some more track records, and it really has been a quirky surface. The Brubaker, they moved it up earlier on the card, and I thought, I kind of was hoping Big Casanova would be in that race, but he opted to run on Thursday. What are some of your thoughts? I know Drill comes in 0 for his last 13, so I hope you're not picking Drill.
I'm not picking Drill. I agree. I would have loved Big Casanova to come here, but I do kind of like the plan for them, putting him in allowance and just kind of getting a soft race for him to come back from. I definitely am not picking Drill. No worries there. For me, it's a short field, but it's an interesting field. Safety Bell has been a horse who I've liked for a while now. His last race wasn't fantastic, and he can be a little bit hit or miss here. But he is switching over to the poly for the first time, so it'll be interesting to see how he handles that. The mile distance definitely is up his alley, so I'm just kind of a little bit intrigued to see how he handles the poly since he's never done it before. But he is a horse who I have been a fan of for a while now, and I think he definitely fits in this kind of a spot. This race is a tough one for me to grasp because you have so many horses coming in here from long layoffs or some who've maybe only made one start off of a long layoff, and it's just kind of a lot of unknowns here, but perhaps it'll make it a good betting race. Blue Tone, who breaks from the rail, has only made one start after a 280-day layoff in an allowance race, and he won that pretty easily. So, he would definitely be one who I'd be looking at here, as well as Safety Bell. I'm not sure it's going to be the best betting race being such a short field, but an interesting one, though, with so many unknowns on the table.
I think sometimes, a lot of times these West Coast horses are kind of looked at a little bit differently than, there's so many more tracks and so much more tradition and history on the East Coast that they have a lot more of those Grade 2, Grade 3 races. Like when you look at that, the field in the Woodward, there's a lot of horses running in Grade 2s and Grade 3s. Out west, they have to run in these restricted races like the Brubaker, and so I think Blue Tone is kind of, he's ready. Like if he was on the East Coast, he would have been running in those Grade 2s and Grade 3s. So I think he fits in this race. I do think the winner of this race probably will run in the Awesome again. Mm-hmm. So I think Blue Tone is my pick. The other guy I really like is Calm Pacific. I just like the way he's going synthetic to, from turf to synthetic. He seems to be a presser. It looks like he can be a little bit of a sustained type runner, so he might get a good trip here. And I think he's another horse that is right on the edge of that Grade 3, and if he were to win this race, I think he could run in the Awesome again.
That's really interesting. And he's another one of these who's coming off of that long layoff, and first time up for a new trainer as well, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out for him. I agree, though. I'm going to go with Blue Tone here, second start off the layoff, a horse who's proven over this distance and surface, albeit against lesser. Just not so many questions about him as a lot of these others, but it'll be interesting to see kind of how things shake out here. So, fun race, even though it's a short field.
Quickly looking back last week at the Travers, any thoughts on that? That kind of, after a week to think about it, that you think you'll kind of put in your notebook or at least in your head as you move forward?
I talked about VE Day last week, that he was kind of a long shot who I like, so I was a little surprised he won, but I wasn't, totally blown away. He's an honest horse who I really like. I don't, going forward, I don't think he's a Breeders' Cup Classic type. I just don't think he's quite at that level, but he's honest enough that he's always going to be in races, so it was kind of good to see him, get the win there. I do think Wicked Strong is the horse to take from that race. He looked like he had that kind of sealed up, and I'm not really sure what happened at the end there. Maybe perhaps with the blinkers, maybe he didn't see that VE Day was coming. Perhaps his jockey thought they had it won and didn't see it. It looked like he had that race won, and then he was kind of shocked there at the end. So I do think Wicked Strong is the one to take from that race, and he's one who just seems to be consistently running his race every time out. For me, I would say the big disappointment was Tonalist. I maybe been the only person who was not at all against the race riding tactics with him there, and I don't think that's what, maybe it cost him the win, but the way he finished there, I don't think that, he had any excuses for finishing as poorly as he did, and, again, I just wonder if he can hang with these shorter distances. He obviously won the Belmont, and he'll stay all day, but can he win at 9 furlongs? Can he win at 10 furlongs? I'm really questioning that now.
For me, I thought the Saratoga, every year I went before last week and looked at all the final times of the Travers, and it's amazing. People talk about the surface switching, and they always talk about variance, and they bring up all the wind. And the last 10 years, every single year, it's a 203, and that's exactly what, I just think at 1.25 miles, for some reason, Saratoga plays deep and demanding. and it's just a tough race. Like, cheap speed does not win at 10 furlongs at Saratoga. And yeah, I've just never seen usually you have to be a good, honest, fit, in shape, well-bred horse, trained by a good trainer. Like, you just don't see a 25-1 win the Travers. It's always a logical horse with solid, I mean, V.E. Day, whether he was a long shot or not, he had a distance pedigree. He had 3 preps. He had 1 prep over the track. He had 2 7-furlong works. Like, you can't say that was a cheap speed win. It was a legitimate, bred-to-run all-day horse that kind of, and then Wicked Strong, same way. Had a nice 1-mile workout the week before the race. Might have opened up too soon. Doesn't really matter. Tonalist, I mean, you knew that he was in shape. So, I mean, I think that's really what it boiled down to. And Bairn, he shouldn't have run back on 3 weeks left, but I mean, they were going for Horse of the Year. I still think he can get 10 furlongs. Maybe not at the Spa, but that's not where the Breeders' Cup is this year. So, I think 60 days off and on his home track, he ain't going to run dead last in the Classic, I'll tell you that. So I think people overreacted to his last place finish. I mean, you try telling me that if they run that race 10 times, he's going to run dead last by 30 lengths every time, and that's kind of what the reaction was, is, when they obviously wrapped up on him. So I think that's really going to go into my notebook, is just like every year, there's upsets in the Travers, but they're not cheap speed upsets. They're legitimate, well-bred horses, trained by good people, and they may be upsets, but the connections and the pedigrees usually are pretty solid. So that's kind of what I took out of it, and hopefully I can keep that in mind for next year. So now this week, any of the races of the 3 that you get kind of more confident in, or another race that you're going to kind of look towards?
For me, I think that of the ones we discussed, I'm most confident in the Forego. I do think that there's definitely a chance for Moreno to go down there, and he's going to be, at least I anticipate him being very heavily favored. So anytime you can kind of toss a heavy favorite, you're always looking for potentially a good payout there, even if you're going with the 2nd or 3rd favorites. So that's the race that I'm most confident of once we win over. I'm also really looking forward to seeing the return of Wise Dan. I want to see him back to see where he is, definitely, and the reviews of his most recent work were really good. But at the same time, I'm interested in seeing him go against a full field, which we often don't see for him. Usually he's going against 4 or 5 horse fields. And especially in that race, there is a good amount of speed, and they both actually drew the outside, so you think they're both going to be sent to the front. So it's going to be paramount for him to settle, and that has been an issue for him throughout the year. So it'll be interesting to see now if, coming off a long layoff, given that that's been his issue, that he's been a bit headstrong throughout the year, if he can settle. If he can, I mean, that race is ripe for the taking for him. He certainly is the classiest horse in the field. But if he can't, perhaps it might be a little bit of a tough spot for him.
Looking forward to watching 2-time defending Horse of the Year, Wise Dan, coming back off not an intended layoff anyways. So yes, I think that adds a little bit of intrigue, and nothing wrong with having him at Saratoga on a Saturday. That's going to do it for another edition of Down to the Wire. One of the races next week, Candice, get ready to go to the swamp, because we got the Super Derby next week. I'm telling you right now, that's going to be one of the races we're going to do, and we'll also find a couple of other ones, as really now, basically from here on out, every single week now, up in, for the next 5 weeks until we get to that Super Saturday, there's going to be some key races as horses make their final prep for the Breeders' Cup, and I know Candice is going to be there, I think, this year, so should be fun, and that's going to do it for another edition of Down to the Wire.